Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, and today we're going to do a deep dive in the front squat. Now, if this is your first 20 times front squatting or you struggle with the rack position, please stop this video now. In the description of this video, I have a link for improving your front rack position. That will be so helpful, and if the rack position can be more comfortable for you, the front squat is going to be easier. Now let's talk about what the front squat is before I actually show you what we are doing. What we're attempting to do with the front squat is load our body from the front as stable as we can and to create as much pressure into our core and into our legs as we can with that bar out in front. Now, it's uncomfortable, and that's the point. But what is correctly uncomfortable and what is incorrectly uncomfortable? And that's stuff that we'll talk about next. Okay, so front squat. Let's talk about the rack position, then we'll talk about some angles, and then I'll actually show you what's going on with the front squat. So rack position. Our goal is to get as much of our meat on the bar as we possibly can. Okay, think of your rack position as like the tip of a triangle. If we just have a slight triangle because it's sitting on our collarbones or in our hands by chance, there's a lot of weight from that bar coming down at a single point. But if we can get more of a shelf, then your entire upper body from shoulder to shoulder in through your hands can hold this weight so that it's not uncomfortable at all. Now, when it comes to wrists, if you have wrist pain, again, you got to go see improving your front rack position. Wrist pain typically means you're just in a really terrible position. Now, things that we can do to relieve that because we're already committed to doing front squats is we can, instead of having this bar fully on our hand, which is our goal, we can sneak that bar up and maybe let go of a finger, maybe let go of two. But keep in mind, ideally, we put that bar right across our thumb into the blade of our hand because that's going to line up with where the bar wants to be. And that's going to help load our bones a little bit better and allow us to push our elbows forward. The further back that bar goes towards our fingertips, because maybe we're way up here, that's more leverage against your wrist. Okay? I've successfully front squatted, cleaned, no wrist pain, no wrist wraps. It all comes down to understanding what is expected in this position. So, huge cue that a lot of people get wrong is the cue of elbows up. So, before I finish explaining elbows up, let's take another dive onto, again, what's happening. So, when we have this rack position, that shelf we were just talking about, it's pressing our body down, right? That's great because we have downward pressure through our abdomen. Downward pressure through our abdomen, upward pressure from our feet, and internal pressure from our core. Now we have a solid core structure. When we start talking about the word up, one of two things happens. Number one, elbows up. What that's going to do is if I want to be in this position, lined up over the ankles of my feet, nice and solid, if I go elbows up, number one, that's going to put the bar into my throat. It's going to make me feel like I'm going to pass out. Now, in order to compensate for that, because your body doesn't want to black out, you're going to shift back and up in order to set it more on your collarbones. Now, what did we just do? We just added a ton of pressure to the back of our core and lost a ton of pressure to the front of our core. That also shifted us back into our heels. And then when we squat, we're going to be something like this. Now, to deviate just a little bit, a lot of people think of the front squat as vertical torso, and that's true. But what do we mean when we say vertical? Is it as if you're right up against a wall, squatting down, coming straight up, perfectly straight? No, because that's similar to the position I was just showing you. It actually will cause you to have to arch in a really uncomfortable position, drive those knees forward, which tends to get people up onto their toes, or they have to compensate by really trying to sit back. Two things we don't want. Our goal is to have our body compress straight down like a spring so that as we store all of this energy into our muscles, that spring helps us come back up. If we go down this way or that way or go like this as we go down, that spring isn't storing very much energy. And if we hit the bottom at a weird position, we're going to come up at a weird angle, okay? We want to compress straight down so that we can come straight back up. And by straight and by we, I'm talking about the bar. Our bodies are going to morph into different positions as we go down, at least our lower body, in order to make sure that bar travels as straight down as we can so that it can travel as straight up as possible. Because deviations mean when we hit that bottom, we're going to compensate somewhere, whether it's efficiency, maybe it's body position, whatever. The second up that a lot of people hear is shoulders up. Now, if we go back to that triangle analogy, if I'm pushing my shoulders up because my wrists hurt, so I'm pushing my shoulders up, what I'm doing is not only eliminating all of this meat from holding that bar, but instead of allowing that bar to push pressure down so that we can trap that core pressure, that air pressure into our core, intra-abdominal pressure, we're basically taking the lid off that jar and letting all of that pressure escape toward the top, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of compression, we're trying to eliminate that compression. We're lifting up, our rib cage lifts up. Some of that pressure is going to shift. It's going to go towards your lungs. And then now you have a weakness somewhere. And it's usually going to be right where the middle of your back meets your lumbar, right in that last or that first lumbar vertebrae, that last thoracic vertebrae. That's why people tend to have to wear a belt, is because they lose that compression because they're pushing up on the bar. You're going to throw out your rib. You're going to have back pain. It's not a good thing. Knee pain too, because your knees will be kicking forward. So again, we want as much downward pressure onto our body as we can. Now, how do we achieve a good shelf position? Well, first thing we're going to do is, instead of thinking elbows up, we're going to think elbows forward. So as soon as I push my elbows forward, watch what happens to my chest. Boom. The tops of my chest, right, elevate. Great. That's creating a little bit more lift, and it's also going to lift it away from my neck, but it's going to be solid. It's also, when I push my elbows forward, going to stretch my lats out and around, okay? That way it's contracted, it's stretched, it's nice and equal. We don't want to be lost somewhere in the middle, okay? So I'm pushing my elbows forward. What I'm also doing is I'm rotating my forearms away and also trying to rotate at the elbow. What that's going to do is what your coach that says shoulders up is trying to get at, is if I have my elbows forward and I rotate my forearms and tilt my elbow out, now I'm actually taking my delt and pointing it up. Now my shoulders are up, but the actual shoulder is sitting in its normal axis of rotation. It's not out of position. It's not displaced, right? So it's open. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to try to get my hand on the bar. I'm going to push my elbows forward. I'm going to let my elbows rotate out. And now you can see it's not on my neck. My hands are relaxed. Some people have a tendency to squeeze. Nice and relaxed. Then from here, I can take my breath, and my goal is to keep this rack position the same. And the way I do that is I push my elbows as I go down. Push as I go down. By the way, word of advice, don't squat facing the wrong way. But I did that so you guys could see, and I'm doing it with a light weight so it doesn't hurt me. You always want to squat into the rack. Okay, so that's rack position. Core pressure, right? So we started at the top. Core pressure. Because we're letting that weight compress us, we need to make sure that our hips are directly under our shoulders. Not necessarily the bar, because the bar is out in front, okay? If my hips are out in front of the bar or under the bar, I'll have a tendency to tilt my hips under too much, and you don't want to be a poopy dog, or you're going to have to compensate at the bottom. Our goal is from hip to shoulder. That angle is going to stay the same the whole way down. Our goal is, again, hip to shoulder stays the same all the way down, because any change is going to throw your balance. It's also going to assign tension in the wrong place. Ideally, as we go down, again, we're compressing that spring. If I'm compensating because my hips are moving or my torso is changing, your body's like, what the hell are we trying to do? You're not very balanced, okay? So again, our goal is to maintain that same angle. It's going to take some time. Now, if the bar itself is too heavy for you to try to really work on that angle, I highly recommend You grab a dumbbell or a plate. So let me step off camera. But I'm very particular with how I want you to hold this weight. We don't just hold it here. This looks nothing like a front squat. But what does is elbows forward. Okay? This is a very similar rack position. My hands can be relaxed. And then again, I can play with where I feel most comfortable at the bottom, right about here. And then I can come up. Yeah, that feels pretty good. And then I should be able to stay in that position consistently. So if our rack position is solid and it's loaded onto our body, if our hip angle is consistent and we know where that hip needs to be at the bottom, so we can get the most pressure onto our quads and to our butt, especially in the bottom, so that we can have solid, flat feet. You've probably heard this before. You want to push through your whole foot. That is absolutely true. But if your feet are out in front of you and you try pushing through your whole foot, you have no pressure down on your feet. So when we set this angle, we actually want to feel rocking forward and back when we shift forward just enough that I can still feel my heels, but right there, my toes clench the ground. Right there, my whole foot just clenched. What it did was it cupped my arch. I'm grabbing the ground with my fingers of my feet, my toes, but I'm still solid on my heels. Too far forward, heels come up. Too far back, I can't feel my toes. It is not, hey, just wherever. Okay, sit down. Now somehow push through your whole foot, but you're back here or you're back. No. We need to be on your whole foot the whole time. So again, we rock. Right about there is where I want. Then on the way down, I'm keeping that same pressure. And because I keep the same pressure in my feet, it's easier for me to keep the same torso angle. It's easy for me to compress into my squat. I'm in a great position. My elbows would be here, pushing forward. Core is nice and solid. Then I can fire my glutes and my legs to come up. So again, nice balance. I'm going to take that breath, keeping that pressure here, trying not to let it sneak up into my lungs, pushing my elbows forward. Elbows are rotated out. Coming down, pushing, more pressure. Then, from this position, I want you to imagine that you're going to take your legs and do this. You want to see it again? As I squat down, this is my bottom position. I'm going to do this. Not even going to assign a label to it. Find my feet. I come here, and I do that thing you just saw me do. Right? As I come up, my goal, of course, is to come up the same way I went down. So if I'm balanced on the way down, I don't want to rush out of the bottom until I'm really comfortable. And it's not even rushing, it's going fast. Because if I rush, I'm going to lose my balance on the way up. Then that spring right at the last second is going to shift and you're going to come up at a weird angle. It's going to come down to you squatting so many times that there's just a consistency. Take a breath, a consistent tempo, boom, I'm back up. Keeping my torso the same, my core, my butt, my spinal position, boom, doing that thing you saw me do with my legs. Let's put it all together. I'm going to step under the bar, pushing my elbows forward, trapping the pressure into my core, stepping back, finding my feet pressure, pushing my elbows, trapping my core, taking a big breath. Walking it all the way into the rack and then down. So don't make the mistake of most people. You're going to use the uprights, right? There's plastic here, protective plastic. Put it into the rack, get it off your shoulders, right? Setting it in is only going to cause more wrist pain. And when you do something with weight, you have to be confident. Nothing screams unconfident like, oh, no. Hit that last squat, walk it right in and down. Now breathing. You only breathe when you're not moving, okay? Why? We're trying to keep core pressure. So when you're pressing, squatting, whatever, before you do your movement, you settle your balance, find where you want that bar's position, take your breath, and hold it. If you're breathing in, breathing out as you're moving, the pressure in your core is changing. The tendency for that pressure to sneak up into your lungs increases. Any shift in core pressure, your balance is going to be thrown off. Okay? So we take that breath, we hold it, we do our movement, press, squat, whatever it is. Now, as you do more and more repetitions, you have to hold your breath through the most challenging parts of that exercise. You don't technically have to hold it the whole time you're moving, but you need to make sure you're holding it through the hardest pressures. On a front squat, on a back squat, on a deadlift, squats more so than deadlift, you're going to hold it all the way down into the bottom. You're going to hold it up and through your sticking point. Okay? Your sticking point is that point where if you're going to miss or fail the repetition, that's that point. For some people, it's out of the bottom of the squat at the point where their hip crosses their knee, or for some people, it's actually right as they're locking their hips out for deadlift. You need to make sure you're holding that core pressure through the hardest part of your lift. That way, you can keep that core pressure, you can keep driving, you can keep lifting. Once you're past that point, if you want to slowly exhale, slowly, totally fine. On a squat, you don't come up and go, and you're going to lose that core pressure. On a deadlift, you don't get to the top. How are you going to set it down? Right? So again, it's really important you hold your breath while doing the hardest part, while you're moving. Now, if you're doing sets of 15, fine. Maybe you take one breath and do multiple repetitions, but it's still really important you have core pressure. The more repetitions you're doing, the less total weight you're using. So you don't need a full brace to do a set of 30. You don't need a full brace the whole time. But if you're doing a set of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you definitely need to make sure you have that full brace. Okay, so talking a little bit more about unracking the bar, because it's really important. What I do is I get under the bar as if I'm doing a partial squat, right? This is about where I would be. What that's going to do is it's going to help me use my front rack, my front squat, to help lift the bar out of the rack. You'd hate to just grab it and lose your balance right off the bat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get under. I'm going to lightly push up into the bar, right? Doing that thing you saw me do with my legs. I'm going to push into the bar. I feel tension. I feel where my rack is. I can feel how my core pressure is doing. I can feel that my legs are in a good place. I take my breath, and then I just finish my front squat, right? I finish doing this. Boom. From there, again, I'll take it back, find my balance, take a breath, and do my reps. Soft hands, elbows are out. Into the upright it goes. As I'm squatting, all I'm trying to do is, as I squat, if I do nothing with my elbows, they'll naturally tuck. Why is that? Because my body is thinking this way. No matter what I do, it's always going to think that way. So it's really important to make sure my shoulders stay down, I'm braced, and that when I push my elbows forward, I'm doing so from the mid to upper back. A lot of people have a tendency to do this. Again, lifting their elbows up. If you do that as you go down, you're going to lose all that core pressure like we've talked about already. Again, if you need help improving that position, go to the video called Improving Your Front Rack Position. It's in the description. The link is there. Just click it. It'll bring you right there. Okay, I'm going to do a set of 5 for you, and I am going to wear my belt. I'm not trying to cover up any pain with this. I'm just doing this to help me trap more pressure into my core. Because my goal is, as I'm squatting, to let nothing in my torso change. I want my torso to be as solid, as rigid as possible, no excess movement, because movement is weakness when you're loaded by this kind of weight. You want stiffness, right? So I'm going to use this belt. I typically like to use this belt anything north of 225. Usually it's in a warm-up situation, but again, I'm doing quite a few sets of 5 today, so I'll use my belt just to make sure my core is doing its job as well. But, normally if I'm doing front squats, if I'm doing doubles, triples, whatever, I might wait until 275, 315, wherever I'm going for the day, and then I'll put my belt on. So what I'm trying to do though, is with this belt, the tendency is to because there's pressure here, pressure pulling into your core, the tendency is to let some of that air pressure sneak up into your lungs. So it is so crucial, if you feel you want to wear a belt on front squats, that you can front squat a pretty significant weight without it, because the tendency to lift your shoulders up, your elbows up, to get air into your lungs too much is going to go up, because you have this inward pressure from the belt, and your air can't go out your butthole. Hopefully you're holding it in, but it can come up into your lungs. We want to trap it. Okay, it's meant to help us trap, not meant to hinder us. So again, I'll do a set of 5 for you just so you can see my normal tempo. Now, something that happened is, as I was doing that squat, I let my hand go a little bit and my finger came forward. Now, normally I don't do that. The reason I did, there's quite a bit of time in between these sets for me. I'm videoing, I'm trying to explain things to you, making sure I have my checklist to tell you what we're talking about. So I'm getting a little cold in between sets. So I'm losing that just a little bit. But the goal is to keep your whole hand on it. It's no problem if you let it go a little bit. Again, I'm still pushing that position, still in a good rack position as much as I can with my torso. So even though a finger let go, there's no extra pressure on my wrists. And if there is, it doesn't bother me. So it's not a big deal. Whew. So something we haven't talked about is focal point. Okay. For me today, my focal point's a little off. Normally I squat facing the banner, but today, for different camera angles, I've turned the rack. So focal point is still really important. When I do squat, bench, deadlift, whatever I'm doing, I always want to keep my eyes focused right straight ahead from the start. So if I'm standing here, I'm looking as level as I can. That way, as I squat down, if I stay looking at that, my eyes follow, but my head does not. If I'm looking down, typically this is where a lot of CrossFitters get into trouble, or weightlifting classes where there's a lot of people. They have a tendency to look down because there's distractions, so they try not to look at it, and it actually causes them more often than not to go towards their toes. But other people look up. Not ideal either. If we're looking up, the tendency is for our air pressure to follow, for us to get back onto our heels, maybe our knees kick forward. Again, we're trying to stay centered. So we start, we stare straight ahead, and we just go down. And then we come back up, staring straight ahead. So again, normally I'm staring right at the big G on the wall. Today I'm staring somewhere around here, somewhere in this void over here by the sprinkler cord, maybe even the crossover symmetry board if I'm doing back squats. That's about where I would look. But again, where your head goes, your body has a tendency to follow. And make sure, if you have a tendency when you squat, because maybe it's, again, right off of your nose, as you go down, if you have a tendency to look up, take your focal point down 6 inches, right? I used to squat where my focal point would be roughly where I would be looking straight ahead at the bottom. But my problem with that was, as I'm squatting, I'm slightly looking down. So my tendency was to actually squat toward my focal point. So I'd squat this way a little bit. So again, it would kick me onto my toes. Nothing good comes from that. So I want to, for me, it works a lot better for me to just stare level-headed to keep that position the same. Okay, let me give you a view more from the front. So focal point change, but I'm still staring straight ahead. Put my belt on. Everything applies the same. Rack, elbows. Always need to remember to have something for safety, whether it's pads like for me to drop it, or if you're using the arms, always set yourself up to be safe. If you ever feel unsafe, bail. Get that bar off you, and you saw how I did it. I finished my set, so I just dropped it from the front. But if you hit the hole and you're not coming up, your elbows drop, you start to round, whatever's going on, bail. Be safe, be in a position where you can fail safely. So again, that's the front squat, a really deep dive. This is Coach Josh from GarageGangGyms.com, and I'll see you next time.